Hello everyone, I'm the person who made the page. Okay, so we have a Michael Jordan fan who wants to go on. He's from YouTube. He goes by the YouTube username of Senor Steele. He would like to explain why he thinks it's okay to go by the NBA Finals MVP award to rank players, and why he thinks it's okay to go by analytics to rank players, and why he thinks that Michael Jordan is a top 20 NBA player of all time, and so on. So let me put him on. Hey, welcome to the program.
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, and you are very welcome. Okay, so please feel free to explain whatever you like.
When we look at the game today, everything to me in the situation is everyone is shooting for the star of comparing and contrasting to, Michael Jordan and the shoes, everything is out there just to make him, the top player, But when you look at every player's game, I mean, I would put him in my top 20 versus in a sense of my top 5 or even number 1. I'm not going to discredit his game. Because he was phenomenal during the 90s. He was. Clearly, as an individual player, he was unstoppable.
Well, I don't know if he was unstoppable, but I get your point.
But just that the fact is that I would say in a situation where he was feared on the basketball court, in a situation versus where reason why I have him in my top 20. I think when he left when the 80s were over. The level of defense was not still maintaining a high level to test, and I don't really feel through his career when he ended in 19. I'm looking at it from when he retired in 1988. I think it was 98. Is that the level of defense was not where it was in the 80s? So to me, in a situation of reason why he'll be in the top 20, maybe 15 or 17 in a situation in my ranking is that I don't think the testing for him during that time would really give him the GOAT status. But as an individual player, he was one of the best.
Okay, so I don't know how feared he was, especially with Hall of Famers. I know you didn't say Hall of Famers, but you're talking about players in general. I'm sure he was feared, but lots of players were feared. I think some Michael Jordan fans make it seem like he was way more feared than he was. And then, of course, when it comes to Hall of Famers, I don't know how many Hall of Famers feared him, but in any case, lots of Hall of Famers are feared. Lots of players who are not Hall of Famers are feared. In terms of the part how you were saying about the defense not being as good, if you feel the defense wasn't as good, isn't there kind of a questionable thing then if you say that Michael Jordan should be ranked as a top 20 NBA player of all time?
I would think so. Because I just don't feel that the discipline. I'm kind of partial with 80s ball versus what I see today, especially with the 90s ball and the 2000 to 2010. Well, obviously it got exciting when I saw the Pistons play in 2004 because they brought defense back at that high level along with the scoring, which to me was balanced during that time. But now it seems to be where scoring is more important and players are allowing people to just go by. They just move out the way when a person is going in the lane or whatever. And I feel the start of that is based on what we saw in the 90s where the complaints. Now, I'm not saying that the Pistons, but I think everybody was doing it in the 80s. It wasn't just the Pistons who were playing that hardcore defense that you come down the lane, you're going to get hit. I think that was just how the 80s ball was being played for. It just as the Pistons got singled out as being the worst team because they perfected playing team ball, at that point.
So a couple things here. Again, so if you question the defense in the 1990s, isn't it questionable if you then rank Michael Jordan as a top 20 NBA player of all time? And also to your point about 1980s defense, I don't think there was anything particular about their defense compared to how the defense was in general before that, because before the 1980s, it was probably just as physical or more physical.
I don't think so. I don't think it was as physical as what you would see. The thing is that today and in the 90s, you look at a lot of the YouTube videos, you see a lot of players standing around versus in the sense of moving cohesively, as you saw in the 80s. The teams were actively, I mean, because even with some of the rules have changed, the double teams, full court press, I think is pretty much as illegal now versus what it was back during the 80s. So I think the activeness, I don't think we should give the 80s credit in what they were doing. And I think that's one of the things why Jordan was complaining so much is that the fact that he wasn't free to be able to do what he did in the 90s. He ran all over the court and wasn't even touched. If he got touched, he went to the free throw line.
So a couple of things. So I don't agree with how a lot of Michael Jordan fans, think about today's NBA. They make it seem like defense is not being played that much. It's not that physical. No doubt the rules have changed. No doubt there are differences. Rules always change and there's always differences, but it's still pretty much the same game. They do play defense. It is still physical. They still stop players on offense and all that. And
not at the same height as they did back in the 80s.
We can get to that. But to your other point about how it may not have been as physical or more physical before the 1980s, there's plenty of evidence that it was just as physical or more physical before the 1980s. And then to your point about how you're saying today's NBA may not have been as physical as the 1980s, how do you know? Because I don't agree with that.
I look at the scoring. When you look back in the 80s, you didn't see games where you every now and then, like you saw it out in the West, because out in the West during the 80s, you had more, gun and run, I think is what they call it back then. And you only had, I think the teams that seemed to be scoring over 110, 120 points was the old, not the Warriors. I think the Warriors, they were I can't think of the name of the team they were first. Oh my God, I can't think, but they were the team that seemed to have the high scoring games. The game seemed to be, if it was any higher, it was like 90 something or in the 70s. And to me, I look at that as being a defensive minded game versus a situation where you see now teams are scoring like 125, 130.
Well, they also shoot. Points. They also attempt more 3-pointers and make more 3-pointers.
Yeah, but still, that it's like in a situation I hear arguments made that you can't stop Steph Curry because they haven't devised a defense for that. Well, and I'm like saying no one's thinking defensively now.
No, but people make all kinds of arguments about all kinds of things. They say things like that about Michael Jordan. But to be fair, all great players, especially Hall of Fame players, you really can't stop them in general.
Well, the thing is, I don't know. I think that the fact is, you don't stop them. I don't think it's a situation of stopping them dead. I think it's a situation where you contain them or you slow their game down. Okay. Where they're not, they still might get 15 points, but they're not going to score 25 or 30.
I'll rephrase. Yeah, I agree. You might be able to slow them down, right. But I think when it comes to all great players, you really can't contain them in general.
No, I agree with you on that. You can't contain them in a situation where you shut them down unless you just get in their head, which is most of the time it's hard to do. But if you do, it's just that one game that they had that bad game, and that's not going to happen again because they're going to see to it. Because I think that there was a game where Michael Jordan said something to Kobe Bryant, saying, you can't wear those shoes. And for 2 weeks, his own teammates were saying, Kobe was so quiet, wasn't even talking. They thought he was mad at the team, but no, he was focusing on when the next time he had to play Michael Jordan, and he showed him, yes, I can wear these shoes. I think you have less and less players, or even as a team, who comes in and do that today than what you saw in the 80s. I think that's how I see it.
I don't know how that's true. Actually, I know that's not true because there's plenty of evidence where, well, first of all, the rules are not so different where they don't play defense. Secondly, defense is part of basketball. They haven't eliminated defense. And third, if you watch the tapes, they're clearly playing defense. And the statistics show they're playing defense.
No, they're playing defense, but it's not at the same. When you don't, I look at how many charges do you see players taking today?
How many are they supposed to take?
Well, the point is, I think you saw more defensive charges than you did in the 80s versus you see now. I don't see how that, meaning when I watch a game,
there could be a number of factors.
I don't see those defensive charges as much.
There could be a number of factors. For example, They want to get rid of flopping, so they're just maybe not going to call it as much. Or maybe some star players feel like it's too dangerous to do because they can get injured.
And that therefore is why I have ranked Jordan at that point.
Or maybe back then they just didn't realize that some players might have been flopping. And there's more examples, but you can point. But that doesn't mean but that doesn't mean the defense is not as good as it was back then.
Well, another point I get at, because I looked at this situation too, is the fact is I look at reason why I look at this. I was in 2009, going to 2010. I had an opportunity to be assistant coach to basketball, and I've been more of a fan, just watching the game and that. But when I had an opportunity to sit back and study and prepare to be a conditioning coach for the next season, I ran across an article. I can't remember the name of it, but it talked about the factors of how the game has changed so much that coaches, even in Little League, are not teaching defensive stances or how to move your feet. And so when I looked at that article, I started looking at the YouTube videos and watching the games, and I'm watching those offensive players who like Curry, who are running these guys crazy and they're getting their ankles broke. And I looked at the 80s ball. I saw where a guy would get faked out but not get his ankles broke to the point to where he's on the floor, or even when he's getting injured, because he's sitting there flat-footed and not really putting his feet in position to be successful defensive. And that's the reason why I make the argument the defensive play today is not the same as it was in the 80s.
So a lot of things you have to consider here, in no particular order. A lot of people in the media who write these kind of articles are Michael Jordan fans. And Michael Jordan fans have this thing where they always have to tell you that today's NBA is terrible and it was much better in the 1980s and 1990s. And in the 1980s and 1990s, it was the toughest time, the golden time, the number one time, and just the most exciting time. So there's a pattern with Michael Jordan fans doing this, and it's usually only them who do this. Another thing you have to consider is when this routine, when people always say today's players are not as good as the past players, or they don't have the good same fundamentals, or they're not being taught properly and all that. This is not a new thing. This is what humans have been doing for lots of sports, including the NBA, for a long time. In the 1980s and 1990s, they were doing the same things back then. Today's players don't have good fundamentals. All they do is dunk and cross people up. They make too much money. They just, they have good highlights. They're not good leaders. They're not good team players. They don't have a good high IQ and all that. It's a pattern. It's the whole thing where people go, back in my day, it was a lot better than today's day, how things are today and all that. So this is a pattern that's happening. The other thing you may want to consider is the evidence. There's no evidence that the defense today is not as good as it was back then, and there's plenty of evidence that it's just as good or maybe even better. This just depends, because there's no one size fits all. It really just depends. But there's more examples, but you get the point.
I mean, I can see that line of thinking, but when you watch the game closely and you look at the fact of what players do when a player's coming down the lane, and you watch a player physically move out the way, or you see when defensive side help, where you have an opportunity to stop a player and the player is staying frozen. I've seen a lot of YouTube videos of watching it, how basically when you look at the 80s defense where you close in, I don't see NBA players really when it comes courtside help or
I'm sure
double teaming or seeing.
No, I'm sure there were plenty of old timers back in those days. Actually, not I'm sure. I know there were plenty of old timers in those days who would question how players are in the 1980s and 1990s. In fact, I know you didn't talk about the 1990s being great defense. I know that. But that's an example right there. You yourself questioned the 1990s. And if you're going to question the 1990s, why not the 1980s? Because it's the same time frame. Some of the players who played in the 1990s played in the 1980s.
I look at, okay, you made a good point there. But I look at it too, though, as like I said, go back to the scoring. Scoring is definitely key when you have a. I've seen it in college as well as in the NBA. When you have both teams are hard-nosed defensive teams, the scoring is not as high because when even the color analysis said it, that they're really keen on defense, so everyone's not really able to they're defending their end of the goal. It's kind of like with hockey in a situation where the scores are so low because the defense, to me, in a situation from being looking at it from an anecdotal point of view, it seems like the defense is high or whatever. A situation, some critics are saying maybe they should take the goalie out, make the goal smaller where you can get more scores or whatever. I mean, I don't know, but
there's too many
it seems like
factors.
that's more of a defensive.
There's too many factors that come into play. There's no way to simplify and know why it's happening. But there's just too. We have an idea of why things change, but there's no one factor. By your logic, there must be some players who are just not playing defense anymore, or not being as tough, or being as consistent.
I do feel like the fact is that when it comes, you made a good point earlier when you said that the factors of and that is a key. I don't remember seeing flopping like what we saw maybe in the late 90s going into the 2000s where they perfected the flop.
But how would you know? Less games were available for the public on tape. It wasn't like in today's world you have the internet, you have NBA league, whatever, those satellite dish league pass things. You have more videos and people recording with their phones and all that. How many tapes were available of games from the 1980s and even the 1990s?
I'll put it this way: for me as a youngster, Sundays were the days that for both football and the NBA, we were in front of the TV. And I was with when I lived in the South, and we had a group of us that we were avid fans of the situation. We were in front of the games, and we would go once the games on Sunday, and then like in the middle of that week, we would talk about these games. And that was one of the things when I look back then, I didn't see the play. Because like right now, I can't even watch an NBA game because it's either too slow or it's just scoring and that's it.
No,
and it's just
there's more to it though. It's because
I'm just giving you my the fan. But the point I'm getting at.
But real quick though, a major part of this is because you're not growing up with it. If you were a young guy, like a young kid growing up with it, I have no reason to think you wouldn't be as into it as you were in the past. As people get older, they lose interest in lots of sports. But what a lot of NBA fans do, particularly Michael Jordan fans, they don't pay attention to how they're losing interest in baseball and football and movies and all that. Or some of them do, but it doesn't matter because a lot of them, what I'm saying is, a lot of them hone in on the NBA and they make it seem like the reason they're losing interest in the NBA in particular is because it's just boring or bad or they're not playing right or whatever. What they're not getting is, that's not the reason. It's because a lot of them grew up in the 1980s and 1990s, and that's what they like.
I mean, if I want to reason like that, that's I mean, you could say that that's what we liked because the game seemed to be interesting. What I see now, because right now, I know for me, from things that have come in my life, for me personally, I know I've been taken away where I don't watch as much TV because of what I'm doing differently as I've gotten older.
So there you go.
But when I do sit down and watch a game, and I have watched, a few, since even during the time when I was making these different transitions in my life, I could tell, say for instance, the era for 2004 Pistons who won the NBA championship then. And I was watching even after that, and after they were criticized for playing that style of lockdown defense, and how the critics were just going crazy. And then after that, still watching the games periodically because my interest was still there. And then all of a sudden, I'm seeing where you don't see that level of that defensive where that team comes in and they lock you down, or you don't see that individual player.
But how would you know if you don't watch the NBA as much as you used to? How would you know?
I don't. I mean, what I look at now, even though I don't watch the physical game, I'm in tune to it by, I go to ESPN and I look at the stats and I look at what's in the situation with the rebounds, the assists, the turnovers, the score, and all that, and I kind of judge it from that point of how that game, or I can understand why the team did not win when they last. I look at that, compare it, contrast it to another time they were playing, and where those certain stats were higher than they were on a winning average. I do that with the Lakers.
No, but from the 1980s and 1990s to today, star players and even non-star players. Actually, let me start over. Pretty much all players in the NBA have similar numbers. For example, a star. A star will get 28 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, and so on. These are similar numbers they have today. And for non-star players, let's say you have someone who's a great player but not a Hall of Famer. Maybe he'll get 14 points, a block, 49% from the field goal, field goal percentage, and all that. Similar player numbers. There's no numbers other than certain players, not everyone, attempting and making more 3-point shots. And then, of course, certain players not playing as many games or as many minutes. Other than that, what else would make you think these things?
Well, I mean, the thing is that I think the fact is that when you look at the game today, it's not team play in a sense of situation. It's more of an individual player. What individual can do. I mean, you look at some of the critics, like you said, are based on their foundation, looking at it from a Jordan-esque type point, where this person has to be a great 3-point shooter versus whether or not he can score, from 5 to 10 to 15 feet away from the goal. And even if he gets all his points that way, well, he's still not considered to be a good player because he's a poor 3-point shooter or whatever. And to me, it's like when we say about the basic fundamentals or skills are not being used, when we look at the free throw percentage in a sense of where players are going up and the amount that they're missing versus not, to me, during the 80s, we didn't see that. In fact, they talked about how high, you saw their percentage right there on the screen there, what their free throw percentages was. And watched some of the interviews with Shaq, was saying that he felt, I could have had more points if I became a better free throw shooter. But the question is, why not? He felt, I didn't need to. I don't want to.
But these are selective. These are selective examples, and you can make a case out of any selective examples, and you can make any cases out of any selective examples. Right. At the end of the day, the Hall of Fame players are pretty much the same. The non-Hall of Fame players are pretty much the same. It's not that different. And whatever differences there are, because there are some differences, the differences are there for other reasons, like rule changes. They're trying to keep them have a less chance of getting injured. There's I don't know, maybe they have different just philosophy and what they want to do and so on. But all that doesn't mean that the defense is not as good as the 1980s or not as physical as the 1980s.
One of the things when I look at, because I guess when I look at the game. And when I really, for example, my favorite team, the last part of the 80s became the Detroit Pistons. And what I looked at is that you saw players on there that were not all, you only had one real all-star on that team. That was Isaiah Thomas. And the rest of the players seemed like your run-the-mill players that represented you.
I don't know if I would agree with that.
I'm just doing a scenario here to make a point.
Sure.
And so when you look at the style of defense that they were playing, and you look at some of the things that they were doing, and you kind of compare and contrast that to other teams. Like, for example, when I look at things now, I look at who's that NBA player who's averaging 10 to 15 more rebounds per game. When I look at the stats, because like I said, I don't look at all the games. But I look at that, and I don't see that in a situation when I saw it with Dennis Rodman. They had the things dropping down on the banners of how many rebounds.
Andre Drummond, he would average a lot of rebounds.
But not as crazy games in a situation where he was consistent every game doing that. Ben Wallace.
He had years where he was averaging lots of rebounds. Now, if you're saying there's no one like a Dennis Rodman today, sure. But, I mean, this goes both ways, right? There was no one in those days that that there was like lots of players from today. They're all unique.
Yeah. you're right about the uniqueness, but the point is what I'm saying is the uniqueness that I'm seeing today is how many points can you score?
No, they don't.
I mean,
No, they do other things too that
from
are
an individual
unique.
player to as a team player, I see more the points is a highlight versus a situation of the defensive aspect. Even I've been looking at TikTok as well as Instagram and YouTube. I see more videos on when coaches are concentrating on how to beat the defense on versus defending. Even from the edge, because being a teacher, I look at what the coaches do off the
Are you
court,
talking
and
about, are you talking about NBA coaches, or are you talking about non-NBA coaches?
I'm looking at even when I look for NBA players running their drills, they YouTube them, they're more or less concentrating on their scoring versus a situation of footwork or doing those
No, but
defensive
if they're
drills.
making videos online, maybe they're just trying to get attention, so they're just making
I mean,
videos and scoring.
I could go with that as well, but I'm like, I guess the point I'm getting at, like I said, having that short background of coaching for that period of time, and having looking for that, I don't see, or nor do I hear, even when because I don't hear of even how the stats. I look at how, like, I remember when I was coaching for that brief time, how we kept saying, hands up or hands in a certain position.
But a couple things you want to consider.
What's up?
If you haven't experienced it, that doesn't mean that it's not out there, and that doesn't mean that the players today don't play as good defense as they did in the 1980s, or that the defense, or they don't play as physical defense as they did in the 1980s. And the example you were about to give about what you did as a coach, I'm sure there must be some coaches out there who are doing that. I don't know how many, but it doesn't matter anyway because they're not all NBA coaches anyway. If you're talking about outside the NBA, I'm sure back in the 1980s there were coaches outside the NBA who did questionable things. And last thing, even if you're right about the scoring part, I'm sure you could find people in the 1980s who focused a lot on scoring. Like their main game was to score a lot. Actually, I know there's players out there whose main game was to score a lot, and they were trying to figure out
the West Coast basketball. You're right.
And they were trying to figure out how to beat the defense, and a lot of fans may have liked scoring more than other things. Actually, not made. They did. There was a lot of fans who liked scoring more than other things, and so on.
No, and you're making a good point because it was that way because that's what was West Coast basketball. East Coast basketball, from my understanding, from what I understood it to be back in the 80s, was East Coast basketball was based off of defense, and the West Coast was running gun and flashy.
Yeah, I never agreed with that. That's just a media thing. It doesn't even make any sense.
Whether it's a media thing or not, that's what things that I remember hearing.
No, I know. They definitely push that, but logically, how would that even make sense? The teams all play each other. The coaches are not all from the East Coast coaches are not all East Coast guys. The West Coast coaches are not all West Coast guys.
You can say that, but
the East Coast players are not all East Coast players. The West Coast players are not all West Coast players. The rules are the same, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, it just doesn't make sense to label the entire league as one is East Coast, one is West Coast, and then the East Coast, for some odd reason, is physical bump and grind, and the West Coast, for some odd reason, is fast breaks.
But that's what you saw, though. Even though they were saying, I remember when we watched West Coast basketball and just watching the Western Coast teams, that's what we saw.
No. You know why this happened? Well, there's more than one reason it happened. I won't get into all the reasons. One of the reasons this happened is because the East Coast, they focused on 2 or 3 teams, and then they saw they were physical. And then on the West Coast, they only focused on one team, and they saw the fast break. When you say that's what they saw, or that's what you saw, how much tape, how many games did you see from start to finish when it comes to all the NBA teams? It wasn't even available for most of them.
If we want to do it from and I have to, and being with the academic background, I have to go along with that logic because that would make sense. I would have to be able to analytically look at it and test every game and see if that was the case. But like I said, this is what what was sold to the audience is that you had that difference
No,
between East and West.
but I know you said that this is what they're. I know you're acknowledging that's what was sold to the audience, but you also believe it because you were making it seem like that's what you saw. That's what people saw. If you had a whole game of a West Coast team, like I don't know, the San Antonio Spurs, I guess they would count as West Coast, even though they're not on the West Coast. But one is East, one is West, so they're going to count that as West. And you had another team that was, I don't know, the Philadelphia 76ers. Are you saying, would you say that every game the Philadelphia 76ers played from start to finish was physical bump and grind, and then every game that the San Antonio Spurs played from start to finish was fast break? It wouldn't make any sense then. And it's possible, but it wouldn't make any sense. And there's no evidence these things were true. And there's more evidence. There actually is evidence that they all played similar type of games. It was the same league,
I mean,
NBA.
when you look at it from that point, yes, but I guess the point what comes down is like who was considered to be the better or more intense when it came to playing higher level of defense versus other teams, and what was their bread and butter? Was it more their defensive leaning on their defensive aspects, or versus offense? And I think that's what you have to look at. If you're looking at outside of what the media is saying, but looking at a team, and some teams where you look at their stats, they were known from when you look at their scoring, is that how many points can you score against this team? But when you look at those stats, sometimes it was lower and sometimes it was higher.
But these would be different arguments. And then also, it wouldn't matter anyway because there's no point in just lumping the entire league as here's East Coast and here's West Coast in terms of styles of play. Lots of teams can do lots of things. The Boston Celtics have acknowledged, hey, if we wanted to, we could do fast breaks. If we wanted to, we can do physical play, or we could play defense and all that. In order to win a championship, you don't have to be, but it's almost like you kind of need to be a well-rounded team.
I mean, yeah, I would. Yeah, you have to be. You have to be able to adapt to each team that you're playing to be able where the team wants to run, or in a situation where the team is able to slow them down so they don't run and gun the whole time, because the team has got a chance to run and gun you the whole night. They're going to do that. So the point is the team has to know either manage it where that team doesn't have that control. Therefore is why we have, and I think that then it goes back to what I'm saying why I would have Jordan at the position that I would have him at is because that's the factor. I don't feel during his time, his 6 championships, that what team was that team that was the Chicago Bulls nemesis, and I don't think that ever existed from during the 90s. And then when it probably would have existed, he retired, because it would have been interesting to be able to watch that series between Chicago Bulls versus the only 2 teams that won championships during that decade was the Chicago Bulls and Houston Rockets. It would have been nice or a beautiful opportunity to see those 2 teams match in the finals and see if between Jordan and Kareem, who would have came out of that series.
Oh, you mean Hakeem Olajuwon?
What did I say?
Kareem?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me. Say it again.
Hakeem Olajuwon.
Hakeem Olajuwon. That matchup, to see how that would have fared out, because and that's why I have a hard time, even though I have him ranked where I ranked, but to give him the GOAT status, I don't see where was he tested during his championships run, and I don't think he was tested.
You have regular season games. They did play each other lots of times in a regular season. But back to the other part, the media has been telling people about how the league was in the 1980s, about the East Coast was one way and the West Coast was one way, and it's mostly Michael Jordan fans who do it in the media, and then a lot of NBA fans accept it, and it's mostly Michael Jordan fans who accept it.
Because they've been the most dominant ones speaking, and you don't hear the other side.
But even on this topic, just by common sense, from what you know about basketball, you would know that it wouldn't make any sense to label the entire league the way they do, and also you would know that there's no evidence that the league is that way, and there is evidence that the league is not that way, and so on. And to the other point about the defense from today's NBA and the past NBA, you also may want to consider, I don't know how many players in the NBA today would say, yeah, we don't play defense, or yeah, the defense is not that tough when they guard us. It's not that tough, or yeah, we're not as the game's not that physical, and so on. I don't know any. I don't think most coaches would make this point. I don't think most other general managers would make this point, and so on. So it gets back to why question the NBA today. I'm not. I don't have a problem if someone says they don't like the NBA, they're not a fan, it's not as exciting and all that. Those are all opinions. No problem. But when it comes to these summaries of the NBA, like they don't play defense as good as they used to, they're not as physical as much as they used to, whatever. It's just it's the players are. I think you're trying to make it seem like the players are not as good as they used to be, and so on.
I wouldn't characterize that, because I don't know. I don't like the fact that when they say that if you put the '80s players today, that they couldn't compete. I think they could compete, especially with all the advancements that they would have. They had the same, treatments. I think the players would be just as competitive.
But I think
I just feel that.
But even though you're fine. Even though you're not saying that, you would have to say that, because if you're saying they don't play defense as much as they used to, or they're not as physical as they used to be on defense, they don't, whatever, they don't put the effort as much as they used to, and all that, then you are going to have to come to the conclusion that the players are not as good as they used to be.
Well, I guess one of the reasons too why I'm watching, because I got it up, as being watching how practices are going for high school students and what they're practicing and what they're being exposed to is kind of one of the reasons too. Like last school that I was teaching at, and I was watching what this coach was enforcing for these students and or players for high school ball, and he was more or less gearing toward offensive based skills or drills. No defensive drills. He wasn't teaching them any of that, because I watched quite a few of his practices, and he even had some of his other people watching, and I asked, well, what day was he running his? I wanted to see how he ran his defensive aspect, and they said we have yet to see that, and it showed up in the game. And the high school team didn't actually had a very terrible season due to that fact.
Are you saying that you're basing it off of one coach, or you're saying lots of coaches? I'm using it as an example of a situation of where, because some of the other people were saying what's wrong with this individual, in the sense of saying, I know it's anecdotal, but I'm just giving an example. So you're saying coaches like that are like that in general?
From looking at some of the information, yes, I think the fact is that we're not.
No, I got you. Okay, so you want to consider some things. I'm not an expert in high school basketball, so this is not something that I would know as much about. But I still know though that there's so many coaches out there. It wouldn't make sense to lump them all in the same way. And also, even if they are the same way, that's still not the NBA. And then also, even if they are the same way, and you don't care that it's not the NBA, I'm sure you could make the same point that in the 1980s, there were lots of questionable high school coaches. Oh, and by the way, I don't even know if that guy the example you gave, and all the other coaches that you might be basing it on, I don't even know if they're wrong. Put to the side if they're right or wrong. Let's put that to the side for a second. If they're doing it the way they're doing it, and they're getting the support, maybe they were told to do it this way. Maybe they were.
And that's a good point. That's a good point.
Or maybe they were told, "Hey, if this is the way you want to do it, it's fine. Maybe it's working for them, or something."
That's a way to, and that's kind of the reason why when you ask me the question, where would I rank Jordan? See, looking at those other rationale and reason is why I would rank him in my 20 versus anything else, because those variables that I haven't had a chance to look at and understand that point, that's part of the argument that makes your argument whether it's true to keep him in your top 20 versus in your top 5 or 10, because there's other things that I haven't considered. So the point is, what I'm looking at is that when you do watch a game or see something, certain things that what if you've read or studied or seen that you don't see it being applied, and then you look at certain things that with NBA players actually when they're doing their own thing, because I'm not just looking at, in fact, I don't really even watch Stephen A. Smith anymore, or even Skip Bayless, because of how they try to control the narrative and aspect. I kind of like listening to the actual NBA player. I was like before I went on to that, I was listening to shortly of Rasheed Wallace, and he was being a very highly criticizing some of the things, the experiences that he had, because he was, known for getting all the texts and some of that. He started really breaking down, talking about some of the experiences that he was having and why. So I want to get that other side of the argument so that I can have a balanced look at the league from that point. But what I've seen and watched, and what you kind of do, you only use the tools that you have in front of you. It gives you the impression that it's not saying that the players today are less athletic. I think the players today are less disciplined as what you would say the players were in.
I have no evidence of this, and I have plenty of evidence that they might be just as disciplined or more disciplined. There's no way.
No, I don't know if we use discipline. I would say more in the situation of athleticism is probably more higher than our discipline. And the reason why I say less discipline.
I don't even know if they're more athletic, by the way.
Huh?
I don't even know if they're more athletic, by the way. They might be just as athletic or more athletic or less athletic than the players in the 1980s. Same thing with discipline. They might be more disciplined or just as disciplined or less disciplined.
I would say less due to the fact of what we see them doing off court, though. I mean, I would say what some of the antics of some of the players today do off court, I mean, even in their contracts and certain things, it's more of an individual base of things that they want to do, or saying like
they were having individual things in their contracts back then too.
Well, I don't know if it was a situation where it seems like today's coaches don't have as much control as you did back in the day, in a situation where you have a player who have his contract. I'm only practicing to so many hours.
No, star players. It depends. There were plenty of coaches in the 1980s who didn't have as much control as they wanted over certain players, particularly star players. It's not a new thing. Players were making lots of money back then, and they were getting questioned from how much money they made back then, and there was preferential treatment.
Making as much as they're making today, though. That's
true. But that's true. No doubt, it's going to get more and more. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. That's a good thing if they.
No. I wasn't saying it for that reason. I'm just saying the fact of the pay is a lot better today than it was then. And the comment that you made earlier is that, because even I see LeBron do this, which I think is why he's been able to play as long as he has, is that he did it doing, he didn't go the last few All-Star games. He pretty much taken himself out at the last few.
I think that's too simple. At the end of the day, when you're playing so many years since high school, and you're playing a majority of games every year, I think it's too simple to make it seem like, well, he didn't go in the All-Star game. I mean, lots of players in the 1980s didn't go to the All-Star game every year, and they didn't play as many years. And by the way, Michael Jordan, he took breaks in his prime. And there's lots of reasons why players play lots of games and don't play lots of games. I think it's still, the problem is it's part of this pattern that a lot of Michael Jordan fans have, where they feel the need to elevate the 1980s and 1990s and point the finger to today's NBA.
I mean, that might be true, but I mean, I wish I could test it in depth to get, to see if that is credible to view it that way, to go against what the information we already have that says that is not, to be able to see if that's actual a fact or not, in a situation. I don't know if that part of the game has ever been tested.
Well, how about this? Consider this, if you want to consider this, obviously. A lot of the coaches, a lot of the people who are general managers today, or coaches today, players, people who are working in different parts of the NBA and so on. A lot of these people, if they used to be NBA players, they were from the 1980s and 1990s.
True.
So isn't that kind of interesting that if you do elevate
Well,
the
I mean,
1980s and 90s and you question today's NBA, how would you square it when a lot of these people are from the 1980s and 1990s?
Now that you mention that, I do remember, and that's why he's probably not in the NBA now. Coach Brown, who coached the championship for 2004, he made a comment that was very. He made it, and they didn't really elaborate on it. He made the comment that he said that the basic fundamentals of the NBA players is not, certain things are just not being taught, and I feel like that's a good example of looking at how the world is catching up with the United States in ball play. Because we look at just here this summer, that was a talented U.S. team that went up against the world and they didn't even medal. I mean, so the point is that there is something going on in the situation where even though that team should have won the gold medal, but the fact that
Go ahead.
I feel like the fact is that with some of the things that coaches who have left the United States and went to the world and started showing the basic fundamentals, that's why the U.S. was ending in.
No,
I mean,
I don't think it's because coaches did it.
I'm just making this is just a statement before. I don't know if it's. I'm just saying this is what the facts of what happened.
No, I know.
The question is that.
Yeah, I'm sure it played a role. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it made a difference that coaches went around the world and taught basketball and showed videotape and explained how to play. Explained like how to keep yourself in shape and all that. I'm sure all that played a role, but this isn't the old days where America showed the Japanese baseball for the first time. But if players are getting better at basketball, there's probably a number of reasons why. For example, they're playing videos online. They're I don't know. Maybe some NBA players taught them some stuff. Maybe they came to America and learn from people here and so on. There's just way too many factors to simplify.
I mean, there are, but the point is what I'm saying is that here you have a talented team, as the U.S. had going into this World Championship basketball. And the problems that they were having was not the problems of the fact that the players couldn't play. It's because the simple fact is they wasn't playing as a team. They were playing as an individuals on court. That's what, and it was obvious. Because they had one player who had an attitude because he couldn't get the time or minutes that he wanted. So therefore, he started really messing with the mindset of the team, which is probably could have been one of the contributing factors of why they were not able to medal and got themselves in trouble with some very good teams that were playing as a team in situations. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things, like you mentioned, a lot of different things that we are looking at or not looking at. Why we would say one era of basketball versus one middle of 80s, 90s is very different than what we see today. And I think that's one of the things is what got me with the teachers I was talking to on what they say Saturday. That was Thursday, and I made a comment about the fact is that if we were to take the lifeline of Michael Jordan and put it at a span time where it would measure up where he could be playing now, what type of ball player would he be? That was a scenario I posed to one of the teachers, and I said, personally, I don't think he would have made after he had got cut in high school. Looking at over the last decade of students that I have dealt with in their mentality and their environment, I don't think he would even made it to college based on the fact when he got cut the first time. Just based on that's my anecdotal point of view. Looking at the cultural ideology of what I see, what young black men of color have went through. And I don't know if he had the discipline or the attitude versus what you would see back in the 70s in a situation. Because I feel like if he was as athletic and as good as he was, why did that coach feel the need to cut him in high school back in that time?
So when you make the point earlier about how there are players who are individual type players and they're not good, you're trying to show that some players are not as good leaders as others and as good of a team player as others and so on.
Right,
You're
right.
right, but that's not a new thing. That for pretty much any year in the NBA, you can always find players like that. But in general, they all have to either they have to do what the coach wants them to do. So if they are that way and they're being allowed to play that way, that means maybe the coach wants them to play that way. Maybe they're accepting it. Maybe they're just trying to figure out how it goes or something. Including the general manager, the owner, whoever's in charge, they might be doing one of those things or more of those things. And also, at the end of the day, they still have to do something in a team game concept. It is a team game, so there's only so much. Like if they're not being a good individual player, if they're not being a good leader, if they're not going to be a good team player and so on, there's only so bad they can be in the NBA because they made it to the NBA. If they want to stay there, they're going to have to play a certain way. And basketball itself is a team game. So you're going to have to pretty much try to do things that that a team does. You're going to have to be part of a team.
And see, I like the point that you just made, and that's why I can't put Jordan any higher because to me, he showed that from 1986 to 1990 until he spoke up and said something. And then, therefore, we have this debate that we're having now. Because to me, when I look at how Magic played the game, I look at Larry Bird played the game, I look at Dr. J and company played the game, I look how the Pistons played the game, and Isaiah. And they played the game as is. They dealt with the issues and problems or successes that they had at that time, and they took it as is. And here you come an individual complaining, saying, well, the defense is too hard, I'm getting banged up, I'm getting hit. And then you have Stern at the end of the Boston and Detroit series and saying, hey, well, this 80s basketball, what you see now is no more. And then all of a sudden we have this new era. Therefore, I mean, and this is things that you're seeing. And then you see certain things, and then that's why you become to believe what we believe now. That's why we're at, whether or not if it's right or wrong, this is where we're at.
But a couple of things. Even though you don't rank them as high as others, you still do put them top 20, which is still pretty high. So the question becomes, where's the consistency that you won't put them really high, but then you'll put them kind of high? And number two, real quick, because you said the other part you said about why people believe what they do. Yeah, you're right that people are being influenced and taught wrong and not getting all the information and all that. But why do they still think these things? And how do you explain that most of the people who think these things are Michael Jordan fans? Like usually, what I mean is usually the people who think these things are Michael Jordan fans.
No, and I have to agree with when you have a situation where you're blinded, and just because I think that's just how it's not just with you idolize a person and you feel the person cannot do any wrong, so therefore you don't see anything else. I think that's what we do in religion or anything that we have a belief in. And then when someone tries to say something different about that, then therefore that's blasphemy, or you're just jealous, you're a hater, and all that. Versus listening to the facts, whether you agree with it or not, you still need to listen to see whether or not it's even factual, or even take that information and go do your own research and see if what any other critics have something similar, or maybe it is hogwash that they're saying, because there's nothing to base that argument on to see if it has any legs to even be anything of any seriousness. But
then remember, you do come to the conclusion that Michael Jordan is a top 20 NBA player of all time. Even though you kind of questioned it, you still conclude that, and you do conclude the things you concluded about today's NBA versus the NBA from the 1980s then.
Well, I mean, I would have to. I mean, to be reasonable, to look at the situation of what, when you look at what Michael Jordan did on the court, yes, did he do some phenomenal things? Yes, but I can't sit up here and make the argument that he's the over, because I feel like
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the other stuff.
No. I think I'm about to ask you a question. I think I'm getting the point. Is what I have a problem with Michael Jordan is the fact is that I truly believe in the team effort of when a team comes together and does something as a unit. That to me, is how the championship was won, or to me, that's how the season was so successful. It's what each individual player has done on the court. And I feel like what his game has done is basically change it where it's an individual player. And that's what we see today. We see where an individual has to, so now I start looking at that, the individual. Now, is his whole resume goatage?
No, but today's game is not just about players doing things individually. It's still a team game.
Well, it is a team game until that player gets hurt, and then all of a sudden you don't see them having the success that they're having because they're depending on that one individual player.
No,
we look at what's the name, when he went down, they didn't win. When Durant hurt himself, what's his name? Kerr?
No, but I don't understand. You could make this point about any team in the history of the NBA, including the 1980s. Anytime a star goes down, I'm not saying every time a star goes down, they always win or they always lose. I'm just saying your point about a general thing when a star goes down, a team doesn't win, that can happen in pretty much any year.
Well, I mean, and you're right, and that's the point I'm getting at. I'm going to go as far as to saying the fact is that, and I've always said this, watching, why is it the fact is that you have, 15 players on the team at a given time? Am I correct to say that?
I'm not sure, maybe.
So why is it that each player that's on that team doesn't get enough playing time to make sure that all players get an opportunity? That's how we did it. You did it for middle school, high school.
Are you talking about today it's different, or are you saying that's how it's always been?
No, I'm saying period. Not just with, I'm talking about NBA, college, or whatever. We only play a certain...
Yeah. No, are you talking about today's NBA, college, and all that? Or are you talking about even...
Yeah, I'm looking at basketball, period. You usually have, I think you have about 15 players or maybe 10.
So you're talking about today, right?
Yes, okay, today and yesterday.
Yeah, but
I've always asked the I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. But these things could have been said about the past NBA, including the 1980s.
No, and I'm agreeing with you. And that's kind of like what I'm saying, because I said it years back. I never understood why you have all these players on the team and only maybe 7 players might get a chance to play the whole season.
Right, no, but what's the connection to why today's NBA is more questionable than the past NBA and the things you were questioning?
I guess for me, from my vantage point and anecdotal opinion, is the fact that I feel like the fact we're concentrating on the stardom and keeping the fans in the seats or whatever, versus in just playing the game and loving the game as a simple situation.
You could have made those same points about the 1980s.
Well, that's actually because that's when my love started, which was the 80s. But the point is, it was lost as we began to go through the 90s, and definitely was completely disappeared once in 2000.
No, I understand. But what you were saying about today's NBA, what you were questioning, you could make those same points about the 1980s. But
and that's actually when I made it, because I never understood it even then. But definitely now, it's why...
No, I understand. What's the connection to why today's NBA is, you're questioning it, but you're not questioning the 1980s?
No. I'm saying is I made the statement then, and I'm still making it today because it's still an issue going through. That's why is it... Only time I saw that where a coach played all of his players, when Coach Daly did it during the Portland Trailblazers series. But it was only for one game. I'm saying, how come you couldn't do that for the whole season?
That's fine, that's fine. If you question certain things about the 1980s, that's great. Or not great, but it's fine. If you question today's NBA, fine. I want to go to the part about when you question today's NBA, but you're not questioning the 1980s. That part.
Well, dealing with the same question? Is that what you're referring to?
Anything. Remember, you were talking about why you were questioning today's NBA and why it wasn't as good as the 1980s.
Oh, well, I mean, I would say I just feel like I mentioned earlier that I feel like the discipline is not the same. Based on what I see on the court play, I see players moving out of position to allow a player to score versus...
But those things happened back then too. Players get out of the
way.
They weren't as disciplined. They gave up and all that.
I don't feel it was as much as I feel more people. I feel like when you look at some of the old vintage videos, they were trying to crash the boards more so than not. I mean, I feel like the fact is that a player
They
has
crashed the boards today too.
no, not like I mean from what I and I know honestly that's anecdotal. I get that, but from what I see is I feel like a player has more of an advantage to get to the hoop and do what he wants to do versus what they had back in the day.
I mean,
That's my opinion.
there's pros and cons. It
Yeah, no,
depends.
I agree with that.
Everything,
I'll go
yeah,
along with that. But
yeah.
that's what when I look at some of the old stats or watch the old videos in '80s or whatever. I just feel like
But see,
when the ball hit the rim, everybody was going toward the crack
no,
court.
but the angle is because your mindset is you already like the 1980s and 1990s, and you're not as into the NBA today. So you're gonna put a magnifying glass on anything negative today, and you're gonna not do the same thing for the 1980s and 1990s. Now you're gonna say that you are paying attention. You watch the tapes. But I question a couple of things. How much tape can you watch? Because there's more tape of today's games than there are of the
It
past
was
games
back then,
available.
right? And that's
And number two, even if you had access to every tape and you watched every game from
I
start to
still think
finish,
you're right.
from the past and today, they do the same type of things. They try to score. They try to get the rebound. They try to get assists and all that. Now you're saying they don't do it as much, or they don't do some of those things as much. But based on what? Based on some selective examples that you went by where you kind of already made up your mind, right? I don't think you changed your mind based on a tape. I think your mind was made up before you played a tape.
I will go along. I mean, with that bias and that prejudice, pointing that out, I have to agree with you. Yes, I would still look at it that way. But I can also say this: one thing I've noticed that I wish they had the gas to continue. I noticed the Lakers last season when I was watching. I wasn't watching it in real time. I was watching the replay of the game. And what I begin to notice is that, and I always hear LeBron say this in some of his commentary when he'd be interviewed, that he always wanted to play the game the right way. And I saw the fact is that I saw some of the way that they were running their defensive, which is why I think is why they made it to the Western Conference, was based on the foundation of their defense and how they were playing it. I saw hands up, hands in the passing lanes. Now, and that's kind of like one of the gauges I would see where most players didn't have their hands in the pass. I said, if you just would put your hand up, you could have deflected that pass and probably could have stolen it, but you got your hands by it down instead of versus.
But aside from the fact it's a selective example, or whatever examples you're going by are selective, that doesn't mean you're right or wrong, by the way. It doesn't mean they're right or wrong. Maybe they have a different opinion on what they should do and shouldn't do. I'll give you
and I'll go with that too. I do feel like that because I feel like the fact is that some individual players, or maybe even a team, or maybe the coaches have said your individual athleticism will counter for you not having your hands up or whatever. And I think that's sometimes has been maybe that's a catalyst, and maybe it might not be in a situation.
But think of this: whether you're right or not, whether they're right or not, it still doesn't equal some of the takes you've had about today's NBA and the 1980s NBA.
I mean, if I look at it from that vantage point, I can see your point. I mean, I still kind of hold to what I still feel today, but I mean, I wish I had the time to actually do the analytical studies on it to see if my argument is true.
Analytics.
I would really have time to do that.
Are you talking about analytics?
I mean, analytics and the scientific every point and look at the game. Had the point to really break the game down to see which era, when it comes down to the basic skills of how the team was successful or not, based on the defensive play, offensive play, and really analyze it and break it down like that to see if that's. I would love to be able to do that.
Sure. So analytics are not reliable. And to your other point about try to break it down science-wise and all that, there's no way to figure it out because there's just no way. Teams win and don't win for a number of reasons. And what's something else you may want to consider? Let's say you're right, and they don't. The things you're questioning about today's NBA are all true, and the things and the ways you elevated the 1980s were all true. Let's just say you're right. At the let's say all your summaries were, you're right. At the end of the day, if it's working for them, what's the big deal then? Who cares? Like if they're not playing the same defense and they're not as physical and they care more about scoring and all that, and it works for them, who cares? The name of the game is to win.
Yes, you could say that, but then that's when you come in with this conspiracy theory or the thought process that the game is rigged.
Ah, okay.
And that's the point where I see, and I guess I'm kind of staying away from that because I don't have the facts to prove the fact that it is that.
Yeah, you can't prove a conspiracy theory because it's a conspiracy theory.
That's what comes a part of the argument. I don't really like going to do that unless I get the proof to show that, okay, it is. But that is sometimes the underlying back conversation that some people have. They kind of say, shh, don't go there. But then you come to the point where, okay, then now the game is scripted for teams to be successful because when you're not doing these basic fundamentals things. Because, I feel like, to be honest with any team in the NBA should be able to, if we just let them be free, we would have these non-teams that we would never think of winning the NBA championship. That one could make that argument, but the point is, will we ever be able to witness that would be the case?
Okay, so a couple questions I want to ask you. One, what conspiracy theories do you think are out there? And two, if you think that there's some conspiracy theories out there, then at that point, what would be the point in questioning today's NBA?
I don't know how to answer the last question, but I look at the fact of, because I heard it every time after when Jordan ran off his 6 championships, and we look at the aspects of what that the fact is that he had the mystifying of the league at that point in time of having like I'll go with the sweep of the Pistons in that point. What came out, like I mentioned earlier, about the public announcement that Stern did after the Boston Celtics and Pistons and saying that this was over, of how that was how that team of ball played, and then how the referees were on getting ready to go on strike, and then they rolled out the flagrant foul doing that Eastern Conference Finals, and basically disrupting how the Pistons would normally play.
Okay,
so they didn't play the game. So
a couple things. I don't know if I would consider those conspiracy theories because they're pretty documented. Well, and also just real quick, how would those conspiracy theories? What would be the connection to why you're questioning today's NBA?
Because the simple fact is, well, I would say the start of it, because it seems like the fact is that once you had those certain things in place, that a team would be overthinking it or not wanting to play because of fear of what the consequences would be playing against Jordan during that time. So therefore, it was set the rule that the fact is this is the new face of the NBA, so therefore, why would we play at a level to really compete or dethrone during that time? I mean, there were some of the arguments that we're making. So when we come to today, when we talk about the certain calls that LeBron doesn't get, he doesn't get Jordan. It's like calls when he goes home and he gets hacked, and sometimes they don't even say anything. The situation where he gets hacked pretty hard, and he doesn't even get the certain calls even that Kobe would get at that point. So I mean, you come to the point where is something going on, or is or isn't, or whatever. I mean, you throw those up there, but not in a situation of where you have any proof to do that. It's just a feeling that you may have. I'm not saying the fact, and I think that's why many of them kind of look at you funny. Even so, I've looked at some of the round tables with the like for example, in the Utah game when Michael Jordan pushed the Utah. I mean, that was a foul, but they didn't call it. Why? I mean, clearly that was a foul. He pushed him out the way to make that shot. And, they talk about it. So, I mean, is that allowing him? And I also remember in one of the Lakers game where the announcer called it out. Jordan got 13 fouls. He had 5 fouls, should have fouled out. And the color analysis showed each time he committed a foul, and the referees didn't call it.
But then it goes back to the question: what would be the point if there's conspiracy theories? The NBA is scripted. What's the point of questioning today's NBA? I know you said earlier, you said something like you don't have an answer to that question or something like that. But still, the question is still there. If it's scripted, if the NBA is having these conspiracy theories, what's the point of questioning today's NBA? What's the point of elevating the 1980s? What's the point of elevating the 1980s NBA?
I mean, you could probably say it was scripted then too, but you might feel that it wasn't or whatever because you felt the games maybe were more real. But it's a possibility. That's why I think it's a point or an argument that no one really tries to run with. We just talk about it behind closed doors mostly, in a sense. Okay. And then the person just says, "Shh, you can't," and then you just go on to the next topic at that point.
Are there people saying "shh"? I mean, it's just the NBA. Who would tell someone not to question things about the NBA? Like those.
I mean, they do, but the point is, you're not going to really run with it because it's just the point is where it's the devil to approve it if it was the case or true.
Okay, but so you're still going to though question today's NBA and elevate the 1980s NBA?
Well, I mean, I'm always going to be a fan of the 80s style of basketball. I mean, I'm more a fan of that than I would be of the 90s. But it's I would question the 90s because I just felt, like I said, I felt that from the Eastern point of view that there was no challenge or there was a fear there where the players didn't play with the idea or urgency to dethrone the Bulls during that time.
Yeah, there's no doubt the 1990s were very questionable. No doubt. It was worse than the 1980s, but it wasn't that much different. Like the 1990s and the 1980s are pretty much the same. You have the years are, 1989, 1990 is not that much of a difference, and you have players from the 1980s who played in the 1990s.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you do. And it was like, I mean, even with the third set of championships that Michael Jordan won, he had Boston and Detroit players to help win those championships. So the point is that it gives you a point. I mean, we look back on it because we have the receipts today. Because back then we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have the internet or ESPN online, where we could look at the data or the history of the information that was talked about, the history of those games. And when we look at it now, he created the ideal way for him to be successful for those 3 championships.
Even though the media wasn't the same, a lot of people back then, they would get their information from encyclopedias, or maybe some author wrote a book, or
you got it, but it was delayed though. The point is, it wasn't like it is today, where you push a button.
Okay, I thought you meant statistics in general. You're talking about
no. I mean, the fact is, when we were talking as fans, we had to basically say Jordan was the best because we had no proof to say he wasn't.
No, I disagree. I'm
not talking about. I mean, maybe not for you. For people that I was talking to, and I can tell the difference, the arguments back then versus today.
A lot of people don't know their NBA. A lot of people are influenced by the media. A lot of people have a bias or whatever. I agree with you. A lot of people picked Michael Jordan, but that doesn't make them right. It doesn't. No.
I'm not saying that either. What I'm saying is, I'm basically pointing out.
No, I know. I'm getting to that. It also doesn't mean that there was any logic for them to do it. Forget about them being wrong. It doesn't mean that they had to do it. And a lot of people didn't do it. And a lot of people did it for the wrong reasons. If you go to Los Angeles, I'm sure lots of people picked Michael Jordan, no doubt. But I'm sure lots of people didn't. I think I would make the mistake of going in their bubbles, and they go by those bubbles.
There you go. You said it right there. And I was in that bubble because we living in the state of Michigan, that was a major thing. Like it's kind of like more people today, because I'm dealing with millennials or who kind of were going through that time of the 90s, and that's all they saw was Michael. So then it's like those students that you have who will only see Barack Obama as their president. And, for me versus hearing the fact as I was growing up, I would never see that in the White House. So I look at that the same thing as we look at that era. That was the best player you saw on television or in all the commercials was Michael Jordan in 2009. So yes, you're going to sit here and say he's
so many people get start accepting it like he is the number one NBA player in the NBA and the number one NBA player of all time.
Because the fact is, I'm looking at the fact of the age group of most of those who said, or they were a fan during the late 80s and all the 90s, that's all they saw that. And that was what's all over television.
But then why did so many people not pick Michael Jordan as the number one NBA player in the NBA and or as the number one NBA player of all time?
Because now you're beginning to see where
back then.
Well, because I think back then, back during my time, is that we understood the game a little bit better because we had better teachers back then. We didn't have those individuals in the sports world who were trying to control the narrative.
I disagree, man. I think a lot of people who grew up in those times, the things they think about Michael Jordan, what they think.
No.
They move
the time I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the 90s. I'm talking about in the 80s in a situation. I think we had more.
Yeah, same thing. For me, it's the same time. It's like someone saying the 2020s are different from the 2010s. 2014 is not that much different than 2021. It's pretty much the same.
I think it kind of was though, because the reason why I say that, I don't see any Hubie Browns. Hubie Brown was still speaking, but he was more or less on TNT. Because during that time, when they changed from CBS to NBC, some of those color announcers went to NBC, and realized how things were going left and went to TNT. And so then you had that cable thing. A lot of people didn't have cable, we had the antenna. We only heard what we saw on NBC.
No. For lots of years in the NBA, there's always been some expert, someone who played in the NBA, someone who coached, and all that coming on TV. It's not a new thing. Hubie Brown was one guy, but there was plenty of other examples back then and today.
No, that's true, but I think from what people were exposed to back then, and depending on what you had in your home. Because I remember, and the only reason why I'm saying it, because I remember the conversation I used to, back when I came out of high school, I was a hairstylist. I worked in a salon, and you kind of had the barbershop talk. And when I look back on that talk, it was based on what people had just saw on television. Right. That's all. That's the only thing we had access to during that time.
Radio, newspapers, and all that.
Or what we read in newspapers and that, but we mainly talked about what we saw on television, and we didn't have. I don't think ESPN was just becoming popular, but it was only what we saw on television because the internet wasn't a thing there. I'm talking about the last of the 80s going into the early part of the 90s. And then getting as we got closer to the 2000s, then we started getting more receipts where we could get them faster versus, like you said earlier.
But there was not that much of a change, even if you go to the late 90s and early 2000s.
I think the sources of information today
contradict themselves and all that.
True. I'm not saying that. I'm not disagreeing with the fact that those individuals were not still talking on radio shows of that nature. I just don't feel like the access for information like it is today, and for people to come for conclusions are coming up with different, because today you have more access to information that can give you a different conclusion versus what we had back then.
Yeah, you can get more access and faster, but the conclusions they have today were the same type of conclusions they had back then. And in any case, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, whether you have information faster or not, and whether you have lots of information available or not, lots of people have questionable takes back then and questionable takes today, and they move the goalposts back then and today, and they contradict themselves back then and today, and so on and so on.
I mean, you're right, but I just don't feel that back then we had more receipts in the sense of proving your argument versus not than we did back then. More of it was more emotional based because we felt he was better.
I don't know. Even if I don't know if that's true. I would doubt that's true. But let's say you're right. People still got emotional back then or factual, and today they get just as emotional or more emotional, and just as factual or more factual. Humans are the same. There's no really much.
No, I mean, I'm not doubting it, but I just know when you start laying down facts and putting down certain things, numbers, stuff like that, the argument begins to either where the person would just start using certain things that you're blasphemous, you're a hater.
That's true. That happens.
And then versus back, because back then they can say, well, he got 6 championships, and that ended the conversation.
That's true, but there's still lots of people like that today. Lots. I'm not talking about.
I know it's a lot.
I know you're saying you know that, but there's still a lot of people like that back then and today. And I'll give you an example of a guy who, even when you give him the information and you show the inconsistencies and you show that there's no logic and all that, he still has his takes. There's some takes that you have that I don't agree with, and I try to show you, like, here's some whatever facts, here's some logic, here's some reason, and it's all that, but you still have the takes that you have, and that's my point. Humans are like this, no matter what the year is. Now, you can say there's differences, and I would agree with you on some of the differences, but I don't think the differences are that big where there's that big of a difference for people now or back then. And at the end of the day, most NBA fans are Michael Jordan fans. Most NBA fans are like this. So you could say in the 1980s, Michael Jordan, there weren't as many Michael Jordan fans, and they didn't do as many questionable things. That's fine. But at the end of the day, as time passed, a lot of the takes that people have today about Michael Jordan in the NBA, they had those in the 2000 teens, in the 2000s, in the 1990s, and the 1980s. They called Michael Jordan the greatest NBA player of all time before he even had a ring.
No, I know. They did it in his, I think it was his third no, it wasn't the second. I think it was his third year in the league.
Right. And remember the stuff you were saying about today's NBA. Everything they say about today's NBA, except for the three-point shooting, they were saying back then in the 1980s. There's no difference.
I mean,
anything you want to come up with. Players make too much money. Players don't have good fundamentals. They're not as good as the past players and all that. People were saying the same things back then. Remember, another thing you have to consider, if you grew up in a certain time, let's say you're a kid, you're not going to get all the information the same way an adult would. You're not going to think of the
I go along with that.
Yeah, you're not going to do as you're not going to think.
You're not going to process the same way.
Right. You're not going to be as open to certain things the same way, and so on. There's differences, but it happened. You can find the tapes on YouTube. People were saying the same exact things back then that they were today. I'll give you a great example. You heard people say today that the NBA doesn't have as many big men as they used to, right?
I would say, I wouldn't say that.
But you've heard people say that, right?
No, I don't know. For big men,
you haven't heard people say that they don't have as many dominating centers as they used to, and not as many big men?
Well, I would say, I have
dominate and all that.
Today, I don't feel like we have true centers really now.
So there you go. No, you're making my point. So it's the same thing. You're saying. You
think we do have true centers today?
I'll get to that. But they were saying those type of things in the 1980s too. Wilt Chamberlain was asked in the 1980s, "Hey, how come there are not as many dominating big guys as they used to be?" And people thought these things back then. To your question. He actually said, well, they have dominating centers, but they're trying to open up the game for the little guy, the smaller guys. This is the 1980s. So they're saying this is what they say about today's NBA. Oh, they don't have centers today. They don't have real centers. They don't have as many dominating centers and so on. And they say, oh, they're changing the rules to make it harder for the big guy to do well. They're trying to change rules to make it easier for the smaller guy to do well. This is why these smaller guys do well and so on. They were saying the same things back then.
But I see how you can make that point, but I'm looking at the fact is it seems like they're trying to push that position out due to the fact that you don't even have it as a thing for the All-Star game. You don't even have a center position in that point. I mean, I look at when you look at your seven and your big men, when you made that comment, I'm like, define big man today.
That's important. That's important. Yeah. What's the definition of a big guy?
And today, I really don't know. To me, a big man, back in the 80s and maybe the early 90s was the enforcers, like Rick Mahorn.
Okay, so Bill Russell was an enforcer. He was a center. He blocked shots and all that, and he was 6'9".
But I mean,
is he a big guy?
He had some size, but I would look. I mean, 'cause that's what I'm saying. When you say define big men, I wouldn't look at that as being your center. I would look at that being as your enforcer.
Okay, they had enforcers back in. They've always had enforcers. As Kareem Abdul-Jabbar said a little while ago, the game is still dominated by big guys today. They're still.
No, it is. I just don't think that the big guy's position has evolved because now he's asked to do more than what he was asked to do back then. He's asked to score more points.
Well, what do you mean by evolve then? If they're doing more things, what do you mean by evolve?
Well, I feel like when I looked at a center, he was positioned down to block shots and get rebounds, pass the ball out, and maybe score maybe 5 to 10 points or whatever. He was heavy on having more rebounds than points because that was what his game was. That was my impression of what a center was supposed to do in that situation. When I look at players now who are considered to be big men or tall players on the court, they're scoring 15, 20 points and they're out at the 3-point line.
What's wrong with that? That's a good thing. If you add
I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying that's where I said the game has evolved for a center, for a person who you would think would play a center position, but he's out at the 3-point line.
Oh, so you're not saying it's bad?
No, I'm just saying that's just where the game is right now. I'm not saying it's bad or good. I'm just saying I don't understand today of when they make a statement like that. What's the responsibility of a big man today versus as it was in the 80s?
It's the same. It's still the same things. Also, you still want them to score, get rebounds, make passes.
Well, I mean, the thing is that you want them to score, but you're not looking for them to score at high volumes. I mean, they're not going to do what the guy does at, what's his name, that just won the championship.
No, but I thought you were making the point earlier that the players today focus more on scoring and they care more on scoring. They don't go over defense as much and all that.
It seems like the game is more geared to scoring offense than it is defense. So
then, but then you just said right now how players don't score as much and all that.
No, I'm talking about
the big guys.
Well, yesterday's center, which would be for me in the 80s, was not. You didn't see a center scoring, and if it was, I think it would be rare where you saw a center was scoring on a consistent basis. 15, 20, unless it was a King, not a King. Well, King Olajuwon, which was more. But I don't even know I don't know how many points. I think it was he averaging 25 points a game. Akeem I keep saying his right name wrong. Jabbar. I don't know what his average yearly scoring was, but I'm looking at all the centers. I don't think they were looked at as being the high scorers on the team.
Most of the dominating centers, yeah, they were looked at as the guys who scored the most points or a lot of points.
But I guess what I'm saying is that you're looking at them to also be dominant in their rebounding. And I don't think centers today or a person who's the big man is. I think maybe that's what I'm trying to say. When it comes to balance between scoring and rebounding, I think the scorer has went up and the rebounding aspect has went down.
I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true, but if it is true, there could be a number of reasons why. That it doesn't mean that they can't.
Well, rebound. I mean, the player is too far from the goal. He's out the 3-point line now.
So that's one reason. But he's not going to always be on the 3-point line.
No. But the point is, for him to get more rebounds would mean the fact that he would have to be down by the goal.
I understand, but that just means someone else can get the rebound, obviously. So
well, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. So that when you made the comment about what is the game or the role of the big man today? I would say it's a little bit different today than it was yesterday.
And as you were saying earlier, it's not a bad thing, right?
No, it's not a bad thing. I just think that like I said, you just mentioned earlier, is that where the tallest guy on the team is at the 3-point line, and Now you have smaller individuals down under the rim getting the
Yeah,
rebounds.
but I don't even know how often that happens. I know that again, that's something that Michael Jordan fans are always saying, like when they say the whole thing about they don't play defense as much as they used to. The game's not as physical. They just all shoot threes and all that. This is people just summarizing in a simplified way how the
Well,
entire NBA
I
is
mean,
run.
I guess the point when you look at that, I'm
Especially,
sorry for cutting
especially,
you
no,
off.
it's fine. Especially when a lot of these people don't even watch the games from start to finish. It's like, how do they know? But even if they're right, let's just say they're right. You're saying it's not a bad thing. They say some of them say it's a bad thing. But if this is what they want to do, what's the big deal then?
I mean, I guess it's just something. Well, people want to have something to complain about, and this is what they're complaining about. So that could
But
be
you
it.
could find
In that
complaints.
point.
You could find complaints about lots of things about lots of years when it comes to the NBA. You could find complaints about the
And that's,
1980s
true.
NBA.
That's true. But going back to what you were saying, when you look at the way the game has changed, and like I look at Westbrook. I feel like if he was in the '80s, he would have a championship right now because I think he's playing at a time where he can't be the true point guard that he is. That's just my opinion on that point because the fact is everybody is on the other four players are trying to do the same thing he's trying to do versus him trying to have a team that he can actually orchestrate like Isaiah did back in that day or Magic Johnson did during his day. Because I feel like today he's just not, he's a dinosaur in the sense of how he plays the game. Even though he plays at a high level, I just don't think that with the coaching is today and where every player is a ball handler on the court and demanding for the ball, it just, where he's just not syncing with his teammates where they can work as a unit.
I don't know. I don't know if that. I hear Michael Jordan fans always saying negative things like this about Russell Westbrook, and I don't know if that's true either. This is again, the media pushes it and people accept it. Then he gets I'm not in the locker room, and neither are you. There's no reason to think that he can't get along with his teammates and players.
No, it's not that type of getting along. It's not. I think he has great relationships with his teammates. I just think the fact is when it comes on the court, and if you play, just pickup games, you have a situation where you're not communicating as a cohesive unit, and therefore that can affect how you play when you're on the court.
That's true if it happens, but we don't know all the details of what's happening. I have no reason to think that he doesn't get along or communicate well or knows how to work his teammates and all that. But I do know that the media, who are full of Michael Jordan fans, keep telling people these things about him and James Harden, and then people in the audience who don't work in the NBA, who don't know NBA players, who don't practice, who never went to an NBA practice and all that, they seem to just accept whatever the media tells them.
I mean, you can look at it, but I mean, when you watch the game and you've played basketball and you've actually, had something you're dealing with, you can tell when you have that player that there's just certain things either to play, like for example, PG-13, who I forgot what team he was playing for at the time, but they were saying that this guy was on his way to being probably the MVP of the league. I forgot what season it was. And then all of a sudden, he just stopped playing. It just was not playing at that intensity level to maintain the numbers. It just fizzled at the end.
Well, number one, maybe they set the bar too high for him. And I'm not saying they did, but maybe they did.
I mean, who wanted to make that? Put that on him. I mean, that could be the situation. I don't know. I'm just saying this is
no. And number two, whatever his reason or reasons were of why the numbers went down, we don't know. There could be a number of it could be one or more reasons. But lots of players do well. Lots of players don't do well. If you're saying we can tell what they're doing, yeah, go look at Russell Westbrook's numbers over the years. You can definitely tell he does well. And to your rebounding argument, also, there's lots of players today who are big men who get lots of rebounds.
But what I'm looking at when I see this lots of rebounds, we look at the end of the year. I'm looking at what are they doing I don't see those stats where I see a player consistently getting 15 to 25 rebounds per game as I did back in the day.
That you're talking when you say back in the day, you're
Well,
talking
I
about
mean, I
Will
don't see
Chamberlain and
those.
Bill Russell days, because even in the
I don't see the. Well, now I'm looking at Ben Wallace.
No,
Ben Wallace when he was the Pistons, and even Dennis Rodman's rebounding.
no, in the 1980s, hardly anyone got 15 to 25 rebounds a game, and Ben Wallace hardly got 15 to 25 rebounds a game.
He was getting pretty. He was in double stats pretty consistently with rebounds.
Lots of players are in double stats
I
consistently.
don't see that as much as I do now when I look at all the stats now.
No.
When I look at, I don't see that. Looking at from, I don't see players who are.
But 15
getting
to
those monster
20,
rebound
15
games
to
for
20
consistently.
15 to 25. That's a pretty high number. To get those numbers, you got to go back to like before the 1980s. The 1980s and afterwards, lots of players were not consistently getting 15 to 25.
If we look at the stats of Dennis Rodman during his career,
That's one guy. That's one guy.
What was he averaging?
That's one guy.
No, but that was one of the leaders, though.
Right, but that's one guy.
No, well, that's kind of the guy I was looking at.
Right, I know.
Well, I don't see anybody who's trying to. I guess that's why I come to the conclusion of saying that. What I do see, though.
By the way, real quick, Dennis Rodman also, his main job was to rebound. I'm not saying I'm not saying he only rebounded. I know he did other things, but I'm just saying his main job was to rebound. So I'm pretty sure if you got other players from any part of the NBA and in any year of the history of the NBA, if their main job was to rebound, I'm pretty sure they can get more rebounds, like to the level of Dennis Rodman.
I agree with you on that, and I like what you said. That was I like how you worded that. That was Dennis Rodman's job, and he took it seriously. I don't see NBA players like that when it comes to the other part of the game.
That's not a. Other parts of the game? Are you talking about other non-rebounding parts?
When I'm saying different, like, okay, you have players who specialize in doing other things than scoring.
No, they do. Come on, they do other things.
No. I mean, I consider Dennis Rodman when it comes to rebounding. To me, he was a rebounding specialist, and even Isaiah was saying how he was a genius at it. That he would sit up under the rim, which I didn't know he even did this. Isaiah pointed this out about.
No, that's fine. Whatever it was, it's okay. But at the end of the day, if other players are not getting the rebounds Dennis Rodman got, it's not a bad thing. There could be a number of reasons why.
And I wasn't implying it as that. I'm just saying I was just making a comment. I don't see.
But what's the? If you're not saying it's not a bad thing, what is the point that you're bringing that part up?
Because it kind of comes to the point where I was looking at the fact when it comes to defensive play in a situation where you don't.
So it is a bad thing that you're saying they're not as good, right, as the past players of the 1980s NBA.
I'm not saying they're not. It's not as good. I don't think it's something that they're considering as something that's important to do in the game. It's not. I don't think. I'm not. I'm not going to sit here and say that these different decades of basketball since the 80s to present that the NBA that they are less athletic or don't have the ability.
I got you. So if you're saying it's not a bad thing, but you're saying they're not concentrating on it as much as they used to, aren't you saying then it's a bad thing?
I guess if you want to look at it that way, then yes, I guess I am saying that because I don't, like I said, I don't see where.
It doesn't have to be that way. You tell me. If it's not a bad thing, then what else? Are you saying it's a good thing? Are you saying it's not good or bad? Are you saying it's funny, et cetera, et cetera?
It's interesting. I'll say it that way. It's interesting that when you see certain things about the game that it's not considered to be, or it's not, you don't have that one individual saying, well, this is like they keep, even though the media has really dogged him out on this from the Lakers, what's his name? Anthony, the unibrow, saying that he says, I'm going to be Anthony Davis. Thank you. Okay. Anthony Davis says, he said it last year that he wanted to be the top defensive player. And then at the end of the critics were saying, he didn't even come close.
But who are these critics? These are most of these people in the media are Michael Jordan fans.
Well, like you said, that's why I'm going to start coining that. But that was what makes it happen. I mean, so the point is that the question is, what does he have to do in a sense to do it, because even if he were to concentrate on rebounding and let's say he tops it out, he's averaging 15 to 20 rebounds a game. Let's say if he was able to do that, then they would criticize him in the fact of saying that he's not scoring enough.
They would find other things too. For example, they would say, well, it's easier for him to do this because today's NBA is not that good. People in the media are mostly Michael Jordan fans, and their job, or they believe, or their brain, or their bias, they have a bias, whatever. They're stuck in the 1980s and 1990s, and they're going to elevate it, and they don't like today's NBA, and they're going to question it all the time. There's nothing players can do to win. They're going to be in a lose-lose situation. The example you gave of Dennis Rodman, if you even let's just say you're right. And let's just say you're right that let's just say that you actually thought it's bad that today's players are not doing they're not as good as Dennis Rodman or whoever, the past players, the 1980s NBA players, the players who played in the 1980s.
They're not specializing in a certain part of the game.
Let's just say you're right. This works both ways. Dennis Rodman didn't do a lot of things as well as today's players, including Anthony Davis, and other players in the past didn't do as well as today's players in one or more ways. It works both ways then.
No, and the point is, I think it was honest. I mean, Dennis Rodman was not a scorer, but he helped his team.
Actually, he could score, by the way. He could.
No, he could score, but he was not the scorer in high volumes. Maybe that's
no, he could. In college, he scored a lot. In the NBA, they didn't make him a scorer. He could if he wanted to.
Well, I mean, I'm quite sure he could, because I mean, he had a triple-double that everybody was shocked when he got it.
All NBA Hall of Famers know how to score. If you tell them go out there and score a lot, they can all do it.
Yeah, and that's kind of like with the argument that I was making before. The reason why I'm saying why not play every player on your team on the court throughout the given NBA year? Everybody gets more playing time. To me, that saves your superstars for when you need them in the playoffs.
Even if they did that, well, you know what Michael Jordan fans will be saying? Oh, the stars don't play as many minutes. Oh, they don't play as many minutes. Oh, they take too many breaks and so on.
And that's the sad thing about it, because to me, if you got 300 players that play in the NBA, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
only 50 get a chance to play, that to me is not. It's like, why are these guys here waiting for your turn, or your turn may not never happen?
Okay.
In a situation.
But yes, to the rebounding, there's plenty of players who are big men who get lots of rebounds.
No, I mean, I'm not saying that nobody's rebounding at all. It's just that I don't see the stats where I might see 5 to 10.
No, they get more. They average more.
Or I might see 15, but I don't see where that's something that people are talking about. How many? It's like, it's shocking to see that if a person were to get over.
No, what do you mean? What do you mean people are not talking about? What do you mean?
I don't hear from, and maybe now that I've never looked at it until now, is that the reason why is because you're saying they're more leaning toward the Jordanist type of influence, is that I don't see the commentators talking about the fact of saying, hey, here's tonight, wow, he got these amount of rebounds as well,
Well, people bring it up. Whenever they bring up statistics. There's usually certain statistics they always bring up. You brought this up earlier too, about certain statistics, points, rebounds, assists, and all that. It happens. They bring it up. I don't know if you say they don't bring it up as much or as enthusiastic, or they I don't know, they don't.
It's more about the points.
I don't know if that's true, but I'm pretty sure nothing's changed with certain statistics. So you do acknowledge that lots of players are consistently getting double-digit rebounds?
I don't see it as much in the sense where you see it like, who's that one NBA player who's dominating where he's averaging that like double?
Are you saying it doesn't happen as much, or they don't bring it up as much?
It could be either or.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, it happens. It happens. They are consistently getting rebounds in double digits. They're averaging rebounds in double digits. You can go check the league rebounders last year. There's plenty of big guys who average double-digit rebounds. In terms of bringing it up, again, I'm pretty sure the media brings it up all the time. If nothing else, you got the internet. The information is there. YouTubers, make videos and all that. I don't know how many focus on rebounding when they make a YouTube video, but
But that's the thing. It's like
information's
situation
there.
you see more of it on the scoring aspect more so than that.
No, but that's not a new thing. In the 1980s, a lot of fans cared more about scoring. Michael Jordan has a lot of fans, and his fans care about scoring the most. That's not a new thing. But anyway, lots of people in the media do bring up rebounding and other statistics. Now, they don't bring up enough of they don't bring up all the statistics consistently. They usually focus on certain statistics, but rebounding is one of those statistics that they focus on. But let's say I'm wrong. Are you saying the media in the 1980s NBA focused more on rebounding and other statistics that are not scoring statistics?
And I have to go back to what you said earlier. I have to go back to my bubble because here, that's what we saw a lot because of Dennis Rodman and Ben Wallace. When the critics talked about that, we always here again, we were talking about, what Dennis Rodman had accomplished during that time. And so you begin to follow those type of things because that's what you constantly heard. So I have to take that in consideration when now, mentioning that point because that was a bubble that I was going to have to.
So just to make sure, so in today's NBA world, when the media in general brings up statistics, you're saying they pretty much focus on scoring and nothing else?
That's what I hear the most. I'm not saying that the rebound doesn't come up. That's the first thing I hear. I hear more about how many points they score.
Hey, please subscribe. And if you disagree with me on something, you can go on my program and show me your facts on whatever you disagree on. If you want to go on, let's set it up. Send me an email. The email is right there in the description section. Thank you.